So dear students, dear guests, welcome to our joint seminar, Human Rights and Introduction. This course is a partnership between the Global Awareness Education at the University of Tübingen in Germany and the Federal University of ABC in Brazil. This course aims to make the topic of human rights accessible to students of all disciplines and from different countries. We will study the history of human rights and look at specific issues related to refugees, public security, gender, minorities, and the role of the arts, focusing on experiences in different parts of the world. Guest lecturers will bring fresh perspectives from different disciplines and regions of the world. At both universities, the course will be offered to students from different disciplines. In Tübingen, as part of the Global Awareness Education in the Transdisciplinary Course Program, and as a free extension course at the Federal University of ABC. The course organizers are Professor Gilberto Rodrigues, Federal University of ABC, and myself, Glaucia Pérez da Silva, University of Tübingen. So today we have a lecturer talking about children's rights, and now we'll give the word to Gilberto to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Glaucia. Good morning, good afternoon for everyone. It's a great pleasure to introduce to you Henri Nzedom. He is a human rights project manager. He specializes in justice systems and in the rights of children and women. He has 15 years of experience and have conducted field assignments in over 20 countries in Africa, North and Central America, Asia, and Eastern Europe, including in emerging contexts. He has extensive track record in conducting research using quantitative and qualitative research methods, including research with children. He has produced over 35 reports and publications, training models, standard operation procedures, plans of actions, advocacy notes, etc. He has worked extensively in developing and facilitating training and capacity building activities, and has organized and facilitated more than 50 workshops, including trainings of trainers. He frequently works with the United Nations agencies, civil society organizations, public institutions, traditional and community leaders, children, and youth. He holds a master's degree in business law and a master's in law degree in international human rights. So it's a great pleasure to have you on board, Henri Nzedom. It's a great pleasure to meet you. You are in Vancouver, a little bit distant from us. We are all in different places here in this room. So it's a really great pleasure to have you here. I will moderate the session, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gilberto. Thank you, Glaucia. First, thanks to you both for inviting me to participate in this lecture series. I'm very honored to be able to share my experience. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone else. I know you are in different parts of the world, so I'm very happy to meet you all virtually. So I think I'm not going to say much about myself. I think Gilberto did a good job at that. Yeah. So I was invited to share a bit of my experience and knowledge about the processes involved in translating human rights into national context, with a particular focus on the rights of the children. And so because my experience is mostly in Africa, that's what I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to use a presentation that I will start sharing now. And so I think you were told to read a few documents and prepare your questions. I hope you did that. And I definitely want to hear from you at the end of my presentation. So if you have questions that you've prepared beforehand or questions that come to your mind during the presentation, please note them down. And in about 1 hour, less than 1 hour, I will stop talking and the floor will be yours. And I really hope to hear from you, comments, questions, or any kind of contributions. So when we say So this is how the presentation is going to go. I'm going to do an overview of human rights. I'm going to talk about the applicable legislation. I'm going to talk about the actors and stakeholders involved. And I'm going to focus a bit on child justice in Africa. Okay? So when we say Africa, it's a whole continent. It's a whole universe. 55 countries more part of the African Union. So you imagine the vast, the variety and the diversity of everything, of people, ethnicity, legal framework, everything. Issues, challenges, assets, and so on. And so what I'm going to talk about, you have to use your judgment, and nothing that I say obviously applies everywhere in Africa. These are specific examples that I ran into during my work in the field or during my research or talking with people, doing interviews and data collections. But I'm bringing you really my first-hand experience from work in Africa on children's rights and human rights in general. Okay, so keep that in mind, please. The title of my presentation is Upholding Children's Rights in Africa, Assets and Challenges. And I'm afraid I'm going to talk more about challenges than assets because there are many. And maybe that's what you are most interested in for your future work as researchers, as human rights workers, actors of advocacy and actors of change. It's good to look at what are the obstacles that make it hard to implement children's rights in Africa, so that obviously, hopefully, at some point you can all contribute to overcoming those obstacles. And at the end, you might have more questions than answers, but it's good. You know what they say, questions are more important than answers. And so it's going to provide you with good potential topic research. All right. So some of you are knowledgeable and you have expertise in different fields and maybe not that much on human rights. And that's why I thought it useful to start with an overview, some really basic information about human rights. If you already have them, well, a reminder is never a bad thing. So what are human rights? Human rights are the rights that we have because we are human. Simply because we are human, we are inherently human. So we have human rights are inherent to our nature. They are not granted by any state, any institutions. The moment you are born or even conceived as human, you have human rights. So what are children's rights? Children are what you could say a vulnerable group, or a group that deserve stronger protection. There are many, you can easily identify many types of vulnerable groups: women, indigenous groups, and so on, minorities. So children are one of them. And so children's rights are the human rights of children, simply. And who is a child? A child is anyone below 18 years of age. That's what the UNCRC says. So that's how we can define human rights and children's rights. Now, children's human rights have certain characteristics. So everything that I say about human rights obviously is relevant to children's rights. So the characteristic of human rights, they are universal and inalienable. Universal means simply for everyone, everywhere. Inalienable, you cannot take them away. Anyway, they are not granted by anyone, so they cannot be taken away, except following due process of law. For example, as a human, you have the right to freedom. But if you commit a crime and you go through a normal legal process, judicial process, you could be put in jail. That's a restriction to your right to freedom, but following due process of law. Human rights are indivisible and interdependent. So they are all linked together so that the fulfillment of certain rights facilitate the fulfillment of other rights. The violation of certain rights make it hard to fulfill other rights. So they are all linked together and should not be divided. They are equal and non-discriminatory. I think that is self-explanatory. So equality for everyone, non-discrimination, and then So that's about the characteristic of human rights. Now, they imply rights and obligations. So you will hear the expression duty holders and right bearers. We individuals, humans, we are the right bearers. We have the right. And who has obligations is the state. Primarily, it's the state, but we'll look more into that in one of the next slides. So states have the obligation to respect human rights, which is to not violate our human rights. They have the obligation to protect human rights, so to make sure that no one else violates our human rights. They have the obligation to fulfill, so to provide the conditions under which human rights can be enjoyed by everyone. And also they have to promote, which is to raise awareness, to publicize, and to train people on human rights. So that's how you can summarize the obligations of duty holders facing right bearers that we individuals are, and also groups. Throughout the times, there have been generations of human rights. And you know, the human rights started really, the human rights movement and its formulation as we know it now started basically at the end of World War II, because of the atrocity that the world had just gone through. And then the world came together to sit down and be like, hey, we cannot let these things happen. We are human. We have inherent dignity as human beings. We need to make sure that certain things don't happen. And even before World War II, there had been, there are other episodes in which human rights have been formulated in different ways, even through history. And so that you have example with things like the habeas corpus in England, the Magna Carta in England also, the Bill of Rights in the US, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen from the French Revolution. There are many other examples, obviously in other places in the world. I'm just mentioning the one that are most often mentioned, quoted, okay? And so at the end of World War II, country came together, and the UN was created, by the way, at the end of World War II, in replacement of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is the ancestor of the UN. And with World War II, the League of Nations having failed its mission, the international community came together and created the United Nations. And so the charter was signed in 1945. And then 3 years after, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. So that's a very brief history of the human right. And the first generation now of human rights is called civil and political rights. So looking at the history, you can imagine what was the most serious concern of people at that time, the rights that were most on people's mind, the right to be alive, the right to not be put in prison, the right to not be tortured, no slavery. So, you know, really the rights that were had been the most violated up until that point. So that's and then the right to, you know, freedom of speech. And also remember, it was a time where there was a lot of struggle in the world about self-determination, independence of colonies in Africa and elsewhere. So civil right, and even the civil rights movement in the US. So the civil right was very an important part of that first generation, freedom of speech and so on, freedom of association and so on. The second generation is called social and economic and cultural rights. So as it says, it's really about living together, having comfortable enough social conditions, and so on, education. And then the third generation is called solidarity rights. How can we live together? How do we provide humanitarian assistance to one another? How do we really live together as people on one planet? Because if I'm happy here, if my basic human rights are fulfilled here and I'm happy, but across the globe, or even just next door, someone else have their rights not fulfilled. How do I feel about that? Do I have solidarity towards them? So the third generation is called solidarity right. And this is a question I'm asking to you. You can reflect on that and share your thought at the end. You've probably heard of possible, potential, hypothetical fourth generation. So I'm asking you, in your opinion, should there be a fourth generation of human rights? If all of us here were to be invited to form a committee, a high-level committee of experts to formulate a fourth generation of human rights, and what do you think we should take into account? What are the issues? What are the concerns? What are the violations that what are the concepts that you think we should take into account in our discussion? So that's a question at the end of my presentation. When you have the floor, please let me know what you think about that. Now, let's talk about the actors and stakeholders. Who is supposed to be applying international human rights law and international children's rights? So some general consideration, just 1 second. No, it's not about actors, it's about the legislation, applicable legislation. So some general consideration, basic stuff that maybe you know that I'm going to go through a bit fast, is that you have to distinguish national law from international law. National law obviously is the law applying within a country or to citizens of that country or to anyone that violates that law. International law between countries, bilateral, multilateral, and so on. You could have instruments that are binding, which mean they are obligatory. Anyone should apply and respect them. You can have non-binding documents, like a lot of UN recommendations and advisory opinion, general comments. And this applies also within countries. You have the regular law and some other documents like policies and so on. Now, it's important because these documents, even if they are non-binding, they show you the intent of the state of the actors. They show you the state of mind. They show you what is the concern in people's mind with respect to that document. So they are not binding, but they have a pretty serious force. People talk about them, people invoke them, people quote them when they are claiming that their rights have been violated. So even though they are non-binding, they're still very important. You could have instruments that are specific to children's rights, like the two you were asked to read, or documents that are of a general scope, but still apply to children, because everything that applies to adults applies to children, unless there is exception. Now let's talk about international instruments. These are treaties, conventions, covenants, and so on. For a treaty to be applied in a country, that country has to ratify it. Ratification, that's a whole chapter. So that it can be either immediately applicable after ratification, somebody from the country goes and signs, or they have to come back, submit a document to the parliament, and the parliament has to vote. So from country to country or from legal system to legal system, you could have different procedures for ratification. And so, so when treaty, there are probably hundreds or maybe thousands of international treaties. You know, you can imagine about human rights, climate, environment, business, defense. I mean, every day you hear people signing treaties, but we're here to talk about human rights. There are many human rights instruments. There are 9 core human rights instruments, 9 principal human rights instruments that were adopted starting in 1965, and they treat on different fundamental topics like elimination of discrimination against women, elimination of racial discrimination, prohibition of torture, and so on. So really very civil and political rights and economic, cultural, and social rights. So there are basically 9 core international human rights instruments adopted through time. The UNCRC, which is the United Nations International Convention on the Rights of the Children. So through my presentation, when I say CRC, I'm referring to that document. Adopted in 1989, is the most ratified international human rights instrument today. There's only one country in the world that hasn't ratified the CRC, and that's the USA. So the United States, they signed the treaty, but they did not ratify. So it's not legally binding to them. And so after being adopted in 1989, 3 protocols have been also additionally drafted. A protocol is an addendum and a little something added to a treaty that can also be ratified and then becomes binding for the country that ratifies it. And so, interesting, the Ghana, African country at the west of Africa, Ghana was the first country in the world to ratify the UNCRC. Are they the country that applied the most? That's a question for another research. And quickly, I want to mention that the core human rights treaties, they have what is called a treaty body. This is a committee of persons that monitor the implementation of that treaty. And countries have to submit periodically a report on how well they are implementing that treaty. And that committee can also receive individual requests or communications from individuals or groups whose rights have been violated. And then that committee have to, once the case is accepted, the committee works more or less like a judicial body. They have to like look into the matter and render a decision. So that's what a treaty body does. So there are key non-binding documents on children's rights. And again, as I said, even though they are non-binding, they are very important because they help to explain, because sometimes the content of the treaties can be obscure, it can be vague, it can be, maybe it was adopted at some time when certain specific issues were not appearing, it was not on the table. And you know, the society is changing, a lot of things are changing fast. And so treaty bodies, sometimes they put out recommendations, general comments, and so on. And so the committee, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Children, have put out several general comments, very important. And beside that, there are other documents adopted by the UN on child justice. There is one on the administration of juvenile justice. There is one on prevention of juvenile delinquency. There is one on the privation of liberty. So these documents are very, very important because often a treaty will not tell you everything. I mean, you cannot have a treaty that is like 500 pages. And so these documents come later on to shed more light on what the treaty actually entails and how to apply it. So that's it for international document. In Africa, we have the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. And we have the African Charter on Human and People Rights and many of the documents adopted by the AU, the African Union. And so that are very important to children's rights. So that was the African Charter was adopted in 1990. And one specificity in the Charter on the rights and welfare of the child is that it has an article on the duties of the child. So unlike the UNCRC that doesn't have that, the Charter has an article on the duties of the child. And later on, when I explain a bit the vision, the African vision on who's a child, you'll understand why Africans found it relevant, important, useful to talk about the duties of the child. It's not a child for Africans. It's not someone who only has rights. They also have obligations. They have duties. Now, at the sub-regional level, when I say sub-regional, I talk about Africa, different regions of Africa, East Africa, North Africa, and so on. You have this international organization of states, like the East African Community of States or the West African, and so on. They also have sub-regional instruments that might not be specifically about children's rights or human rights, but they still contain provisions that are important to human rights and to children's rights. For example, on free speech, freedom of speech. So it's important when you want to look at children's rights in Africa, to also pay attention to that. Domestic instruments are instruments adopted, obviously, within a country. So you can say national or domestic. Some can be specific to children, like a lot of countries in Africa have adopted child protection code, juvenile justice law, and so on. But regular laws apply to children as well. So any penal code apply to children unless there is an exception. Any civil code will apply to children, and so on. Now, what I want to mention the legitimacy of the law is that, and I'll probably elaborate on this a bit later, is that many laws are adopted, but they are not applied. They are not. There's not dissemination of the law, and you wonder why did they adopt the law in the first place? You know, and then when I talk to people, when I go out there in Africa and have, you know, do interviews and talk to different people, a lot of people tell me, you know, Henry, our countries, we adopt this law under pressure from international partners. If you want to be part of a group of countries that's going to get help and international aid and assistance from the EU or from the US or from any other international partner, sometimes one of the conditions is that you have to have a law against, let's say, child marriage or child trafficking and so on. And so under pressure, these countries adopt all these laws, but you know, were they really ready for it? Were they really convinced about the necessity of the law? Are they ready to apply it? And so there is a big question about, and I'm not saying the law is bad. I mean, we can all easily agree that it's better to have that law, which it's not that much applied, than not have it at all. But, you know, it's good then to see what was the intention, where the people really, did they understand the necessity of the law, or was it really just to please international partners? So that's something that comes often when you go in the field and talk to people, and when you do the literature review and see what are the laws, are they applied or not, you are going to hear that argument very often. Now that we've looked at the legal instrument, let's see to whom does it apply. Public actors. So children's rights have to be upheld by public institutions in all sector and at all level, education, health, justice, and everything else. And you have countries that have ministries that have specific mandate on children's rights, and countries that don't have. One thing that I found that's very important is that the importance of social work is not yet recognized in Africa. And that's a really big gap. You can see in Western countries how important social work is, how important of a job social workers do. In Africa, that sector is really lagging behind by a lot. Sectors like justice or the police, you know, law enforcement are much more developed because I guess traditionally those are the institutions, those are the sectors that the countries needed to establish, especially newly independent countries from former colonial powers. Justice, law enforcement are the sector, or army, those are the sector that really needed to be established and strengthened to assert state authority, for a state to be present, for a state to have an existence, and to have its laws enforced. But social work is so important because social workers are really those, and remember, I'm trying to focus on child justice, okay? Not that much on education or health or everything, but as we said at the beginning, everything is linked. So from a child justice point of view, social work is critically important because once a child is in the justice system, it's good to have a social worker that work with them, that know their rights, that can take care of them, that can handle the intervention of all the actors, of the police, the lawyer, the attorney, the prosecutor, the health system. If a child in the justice system needs a health intervention because they need to be treated, it's also good to go through a social worker. Now, that sector in Africa is really underdeveloped. I've looked into it a lot, and there's a lot of advocacies for countries in Africa to really bolster, to support, and have a more robust social work sector. but there's still a lot of work to be done. And a lot of social work kind of work is conducted by civil society, by NGOs, and so on. So you can have also public entities with a specific human rights mandate. You have ombudsman, and ombudsman is just an official appointed by the state to look into individual cases. They are easier to access than, let's say, a legal court, because there's less formality. You don't need to have a lawyer, and usually it's free. Then finally, you have national human rights institutions. Now, national human rights institutions are institutions created by the state to monitor, to defend, to promote human rights. But they are created by the state. They're supposed to be independent. Now, their level of independence and professionalism is going to depend on the whole context. In Africa and in developing countries, you will often see that there's a lot of criticism because they work for the government. They are created, appointed, and paid by the government, so they don't have that independence that they should have. So there's a lot of criticism about towards national human rights institutions in Africa. Civil society, a key sector in upholding human rights. So civil society is made up of NGOs, associations, trade unions, and so on. Now, this is really a vital actor in defending and promoting human rights. They are very good at advocacy and implementation, because NGOs, especially grassroots organizations, they can go in the field. They can go to places where international partners and the UN agencies cannot go because it's either too far or dangerous, or you have, there's a whole set of cultural code that you must know. So they are really key actors in implementing children's rights. As I said earlier, even a lot of social work kind of work is conducted by NGOs. So often, so they are key partners. So even when there's funding, the UN work with NGOs and associations to implement different projects. Now, the level of professionalism and the level of efficiency and effectivity of civil society depends on the context. If you have a context where there is democracy and freedom, and NGOs can go out there and promote human rights and criticize the government, and that's good. If you have a context where there is a lot of obstacle and crackdown on freedom of speech and human rights workers and NGOs, well, civil society is going to be pretty weak, and you can see that happening in many places in the world, and clearly in many countries in Africa. And let's not forget, a child has to be an actor of his or her own protection. One of the key principles in the UNCRC is the right of the child to participate in any case, any affair, any proceeding that concerns him or her. They have the right to participate. I think that's Article 12 of the UNCRC. So I just want to mention that a child and their family, obviously, they have to be an actor of their own protection. Private entities also are human rights actors. You've probably heard of the term corporate social responsibility. So when we say private entities, we are mostly talking about the business world, okay? Business world, you've probably heard about a lot of lawsuits being brought against big world businesses, especially in the oil sector. You've heard of a lawsuit in Nigeria against oil companies, British-based oil companies, because of destruction of environment, people's livelihood. People have to move far away because the forest has been destroyed. I mean, I think you have a lot of that happening right now in Latin America, in the Amazons, but you have that in Africa as well. So corporate social responsibility is a business model by which we look into how businesses can work in a way that enhance human rights, protect and promote human rights, protect the environment instead of degrading the environment, instead of violating human rights. Having children working for a business, that's against corporate social responsibility. Having children work in a sweatshop to make nice clothes and shoes and everything. That's against corporate social responsibility. So more and more private entities are being told that they also are human rights actors. They have to respect human rights. They have to work in a way that protect and promote human rights and children's rights. And in that line, the UN has published a UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And then later, UNICEF, which is the United Nations agency in charge of children, has also adopted a document called Children's Rights and Business Principles. So let's not forget really the importance of holding corporations, especially big ones, hold them responsible of protecting and promoting human rights and children's rights. And that in relation to children's rights, you hear all the time about child soldiers. There's a lot of children working in mines in Africa. There's a lot of mining activity in Africa, everywhere in Africa, Congo, Mali, Niger, everywhere. Africa, as most countries in the world, is very rich in minerals. So mining activity employs too many children, too many. And so corporate social responsibility is very relevant in this topic. International partners, let me keep an eye on the time. International partners, you could have global, regional, or sub-regional partners. I think we talked about them, the UN, African Union, international NGOs, and so on. Maybe what we should pay attention to is the principle of subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity means that each state is primarily responsible of protecting, respecting, upholding human rights and children's rights. Any external help comes to supplement that. As a country, I'm the first one. I'm the first one responsible of protecting human rights. So the UN, the African Union, Amnesty International, the European Union, or any, say, they come secondly to help me. It's my first responsibility because they are my people. I'm the government. I was elected. I was put in place by them to work for them, to protect them, to represent them. So this is very important. If you want to sometimes ask yourself, but why don't the UN move in and protect children? Why can't the EU send people? No, because there is a principle of subsidiarity. The country has to invite you, or they have to at least accept your help. And also, in relation to what I said earlier about the laws being adopted maybe by a Congress that didn't even know what they were voting on, international aid is being scrutinized more and more. The question is being asked whether it's really selfless. And that comes a lot in the discussions between countries. And how much is international help really selfless? How much is it really based on this idea of solidarity, of helping people? Or is it a way for the international community to put pressure on countries to direct internal politics in a certain way? This is a question that is being asked more and more. And you will even hear the expression decolonize aid, decolonize international assistance, decolonize international humanitarian assistance, because just imagine, when was the UN created? How many millions and billions have been poured into international development aid? But who's pulling the string? Who's holding the string? Who's behind the wheel? Is it the people down in the field, the children and their family and the people who represent them? Or is it people in the Western world basically dictating how everything should go? And I'm not saying one or bad or one is wrong or right. I'm just drawing your attention to different aspects and different thematic and problematics that you want to look into when you analyze international human rights and international children's rights with a focus on Africa. And talking about Africa, we are going to go into that focus now. We look at the overall context. Socioeconomic reality is no secret for anyone. This is a place where you have a lot of developing countries, third world countries, global south, indebted countries, heavily indebted countries. There's a lot of beautiful words to describe the difficult economic situation in which these countries find themselves. And so that has an impact on children's rights. Because really, how much can a country invest in children's rights? In preparing this presentation, I did a brief research, so I didn't cover this topic of budget for child protection. I didn't cover it vastly, but I just found 2 countries. You can see how budgeting for child protection goes. And by the way, child protection is the aspect of children's rights that look into child justice. Okay, so child protection is not child education, it's not child health. It's really the aspect that look into justice for children. So I took 2 countries because those were so financing for children is very hard to find data online. It should be available, maybe not forcibly online, but it shouldn't be a secret. That's what I'm trying to say. So anyway, I found Burundi and Zambia, and you can see how from one year to another, while Zambia is making effort to increase state budget for child protection, Burundi is going the other way. And again, from one country to another, there are going to be differences. But when you look at it again, when you come back to the whole economic situation of underdevelopment and all that, there is a lot of advocacy. UNICEF has been doing a lot of advocacy for children, for state to increase budget allocated to child protection. And there's a lot of work to be done. Some countries, as you saw, are doing well. Others are still not really making children's rights a priority. There's a lot of ongoing challenges to state authorities. You have, I think it would be easier to count countries in Africa that have stability and no war than countries that are in, have some sort of trouble. Jihadists over here, separatists over there, rebels at the south, armed groups. You have that everywhere. Yes, 2 days before, there was an attack in central Nigeria where 8 people were killed and 150 people were kidnapped. And this happens often in Nigeria. It happens often. You often hear these kind of things in Mali, in Niger, in Uganda, in Ethiopia. So anyway, my point is, when you have a central state that has to defend themselves, to even preserve the integrity of the territory. You have separatists that want to break away and form a different country. You're going to need a lot of advocacy. You are going to really need to make a lot of effort for them to put children's rights as a priority on their list of concerns. There's really a lot of these challenges that, because it's going to consume the resources, it's going to consume the energy and the attention, right? And also there are vast portions of certain countries that are not really controlled by the state. You have that in Mali, you have that in Chad. So Chad is a country in the central part of Africa. I was there, and I went to a province called Lake Chad, or Lake. The name of the province in Chad is called Lake because it's around Lake Chad. Now, Lake Chad, that's the region where the infamous terrorist group Boko Haram has been very active. And the capital city of the Lake province is called Bol. So I went to Bol and I went to a smaller city called Bagasola. Now, when you went through these places, you see vast amount of territory with no state presence. By state presence, I mean public state institutions that shows you that, okay, I'm in a country and the state institutions are here, the government is here, they can protect me. No police station, no tribunal, no like public hospital. And so when you have children and young people in these places, that people know that, okay, I'm from this country just because, yeah, they know that, I'm from Cameroon, I'm from Chad, I'm from Congo, but there's no public state school. And so when, for example, speaking about this issue in Lake Chad, when you have jihad group that come in and use promises and threat to recruit children, I mentioned earlier the issue of child soldiers or children associated with armed groups and force groups. When you have jihad that come in and use threats and promises to recruit these young people, you see how vulnerable they are because they come from poor family. I mentioned the socio-economic conditions. They come from poor family. They don't see a lot of future ahead of them. There's not a lot of promises from the state. there's a lot of political premises, of course, when the elections are here. But so when an armed group come and be, okay, you join us, they use also threat. Let's be clear, they use coercion to recruit these young people, not just promises, but join us, you'll have an AK-47, you'll be a captain, you'll have a wife, you'll have a house, you'll be someone. And when we finally create that Caliphate or that Islamic State, you are going to be someone, a chief of some. You see how vulnerable young people that don't see the state present, how vulnerable they are facing these armed groups and all these threats and promises from these bad guys. There's a limited knowledge of norms and rights. If you want to protect anyone, you, the actor, you have to know the rights and norms that you're trying to uphold. But it's good that they know their rights. In a context where formal education is very limited, people don't even know their human rights. People don't even know their fundamental human rights, so they don't know when their rights have been violated, right? So that's also a big issue. I already talked about the presence of state institutions. And again, human rights are indivisible and interdependent. So if you don't have education, will you have human rights? If you don't have peace, will you have children's rights? So everything has to be, there is this idea of a holistic approach where any project should look at different aspects and see how well they can integrate different problematics, even if they are not going to solve all the problematics. I already showed this, and this is in Ethiopia, just to illustrate how life can be hard. This child, so I took this picture with my phone. I was going through Ethiopia. So this child, he's going to school. This is in the night. He's living in a house where they don't have electricity. So he goes out to do his homework under the lamppost. And in front of him is a scale where if you want to know how much kilogram you weigh, you give him a few coins and then get on the scale. And that's how he makes money, by doing that and also working on his homework under a lamppost, because at home, either they don't have electricity or they have it, but there's too much and too often there is power outage. Just to illustrate, again, the difficult economic context in which children's rights have to be promoted. But I said at the beginning, take everything that I say with caveat. It doesn't obviously apply. There are big cities and palaces and people living very comfortably, but the majority of people don't have the basic comfort of life in Africa. And then we'll briefly look into culture, and that's the last subchapter of the presentation. So the status of a child, very important question. In African culture, you don't define a child only by the age. When we say a child is anyone below 18 years of age, that's a UNCRC, and that's the African Charter also on the rights and welfare of the child. But the definition of the child in African culture is not just based on age. And so when you try to talk to people about children's rights, that's something you have to be aware of. A child, once you grow up and start working at the farm with the family and start making money, or you can move out of the house, or you've got a girl pregnant, or you also go through, in different cultures, there are rites of passages. When you go through that rite of passage, you become an adult, or you are slowly moving from childhood to adulthood, even if you are not 18 years of age. So that kind of conception is still very present in a lot of places in Africa. So if you move in to tell people that a child is someone below 18 years of age, you have just to be aware of that. And a child is sometimes considered as the property of their parents. The parents have every right, and children have no right. So that has an impact on child justice. If a child is a victim of something, it is the parent that feels offended. It is the parent that needs redress and reparation. And the child victim themselves is not really seen as subject of justice and a legal subject that deserves protection. And there is also a lot of non-state justice mechanism still going on. So ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution Mechanism, it estimated that in developing countries, over 80 80% of cases are brought before ADR mechanism and not to state justice systems. Now, when you have places, the one that I mentioned, where you have no police station, no tribunal in the first place, well, people are going to turn to ADR. And ADR, they are not very knowledgeable about children's rights. So if a girl is raped, or if a boy is beaten, or if, I don't know, or killed, what kind of principles are these non-justice system mechanisms are going to apply? Children's rights are often not very, they are not knowledgeable about it. They haven't been trained about it. And again, looking at the status of the child, it's not really their concern to see that a child is a legal subject that deserves protection and has to be at the center of their preoccupations. And so there's a lot of private deals and so on. There's still a lot of traditional and harmful practices going on. FGM, female genital mutilation, child marriage, polygamy, system by which a man can have many wives. Corporal punishment is still pretty much the norm in a lot of places. A lot of Africans will laugh at you if you came and say you shouldn't beat up a child who's misbehaving. That's like that's European thought, man. If a child misbehaves, we spank them. That's what people are going to tell you. So these traditional and harmful practices are still very much present. And there's a lot of advocacy to work against them, but it's very hard to change people's habit. So here I was in northern Mali, and when I was interviewing people, and these are either chief of blogs or imams or qadis or religious figure, they are the ones who are going to handle cases in the community, either because there is no state presence, as I said, but mostly because people trust them more than they trust the formal state legal system. Just imagine all the difficulties in going through the formal state justice system, the fees, having a lawyer, having form to fill, the distance, the delay. I mean, it's even in Western country, no one wants to go to court, right? No, so in a place where you don't even have the next tribunal is like, I don't know how many kilometers or hundreds of kilometers away, easy to turn to a traditional state, traditional justice system. Look at the panel, no woman. Now imagine the amount of work that you would have to go there and talk about gender equality, right? So just another aspect. FGM. So FGM is female genital mutilation. And there's something on the news. So this is the African map. On the right, on the left here, you have Senegal. And then if you zoom in, within Senegal, you have the Gambia. What's going on in the Gambia? That's a country, the Gambia. So in the Gambia, FGM was criminalized in 2015. These laws, again, are not applied very often. Like the implementation, it takes time for the laws to be enforced. The first conviction were obtained in 2023. 3 elderly women were condemned for having performed FGM. They had to pay fines or to be put in prison. An Islamic figure went out and raised money to pay for the fines. And he raised that money publicly. So that ignited a lot of discussion and passion. So much so that, so he paid the fine and the women were let free. But because of the discussion that he has ignited, a member of the parliament submitted a bill in the Zambia Congress or parliament to reverse the criminalization of FGM. So long story short, next month in June, the Zambia parliament are going to vote on whether to actually decriminalize FGM. Now imagine, we're in 2024. I don't know if you know exactly what FGM is, but it's, it's female circumcision. It's really, I don't know where it comes from, but it's really not a good thing. And can you imagine that in 2024, a country is considered decriminalizing FGM? Again, you have to, be aware of the context, the influence of religion, the fact that state leaders often have to compose or deal with, because they don't want to lose their support base. They want to please some high religious figures, because a lot of people do what the imam tell them to do. A lot of people do what religious figures tell them to do. So if you don't want to lose your support base as a leader, as a strategic politician, sometimes they don't want to take on these kind of issues. And then child marriage and this is the last thing, is this is a map that shows you the prevalence of child marriage in Africa. So the darker the color, the higher the prevalence of child marriage in Africa. Even now, the practice is still very much present. When I was in Niger, I actually met up in a prison with a girl who was in prison for having killed her husband. She was, I don't know if she was 15 when I met her or if she had been married when she was 15. But anyway, she had been married as a young girl under 18 by force to a much older man. And then she later killed him because it was a forced marriage and she was in prison. So now you have murder. She murdered her husband, but you have also child marriage. How do you reconcile these two issues? How do you work your way through it? So again, a lot of issues to look at. And I'm going to end my presentation with the dichotomy of universalism versus cultural relativism. This is where we look at, so universalism means that human rights apply to everyone everywhere. Cultural relativism say, no, that's a lot of human rights principle, child rights principle are driven by Western liberal thought. That's not good for here. We have to adapt to our culture. And you see that indeed, the culture is very important, very diverse from place to place. The context has to be taken into account. And so it is human rights principles as we know them, is it fit for the context in which we're trying to apply it, or should it be adapted to each individual context? I'm going to leave you with that question. I believe I'm right on time for my presentation. And sorry if I went too fast. You know, when you start, you realize that put too much information, but anyway, thanks for your attention. Let me hear from you. I've asked you a few questions and you probably have also questions from your own. So thank you. So yeah, absolutely. The fact that countries have ratified law, because ratification of international law also sometimes is done under pressure. But I think we shouldn't put too much concern into that pressure. It's, as I said, it's better to have a law or a treaty ratified than a big legal gap where, grave violations are not criminalized or prohibited. So yes, absolutely. These laws, when they are adopted or once the treaties are ratified, are a great asset. They are a great argument for anyone who's doing advocacy. The civil society uses it a lot. UNICEF uses it a lot. Anyone can use it a lot because the country ratified it. So they cannot turn away and say, hey, we did it under the pressure, so we are not really responsible of applying it. And sooner or later, as long as the treaty has not been, de-ratified, or as long as the law has not been retracted, someone is going to apply it. Like, take the example in Gambia, the FGM law, the criminalization, it was actually in a code called the Women's Act. So it was an amendment of the Women's Act in Gambia with 1 or 2 articles criminalizing FGM. And the first conviction were obtained in 2023. That's what, 8 years later. That's a long time that you have a law, and the first known instance of applying it really is 8 years later. It means, but in between time, do you think the practice stopped? No, of course not. Because FGM, a lot of people do it because they believe they have to do it. Some people think it's religious based. Some people make money out of it. So just not to forget this another aspect. When you're trying to stop a practice, you have to look at all the aspects. If people are making money out of it, well, what's the alternative that you provide to them? Because even if you convince them that that's not good, well, how do one make money? That I've been, from generation, my family has been, that was our livelihood, right? So anyway, back to the topic. 8 years later, you have the first conviction. So it means that eventually the law is going to work. So it's good that we have them. It's good, and yeah, you can actually use it as advocacy method And sometimes there could be instances where the law is not applied, not because of lack of political will, but again, there are so many issues that countries have to handle. I mentioned all the instability and challenges to state authorities and a lot of everything going on. So sometimes they just need a bit of advocacy and help and maybe financial resources to actually implement it. There is at times a lot of willingness to do so. People are educated, so anyway. And then the second aspect of the question, children activism. Now, this is really going to depend on the context. If you have a context where, you remember what I said earlier about the status of the child, who's a child? If you're in a country where my child is my property, he has no right, he cannot talk to me, he don't even have the right to participation, regardless of what Article 12 of the CRC says, it's going to be hard to give children a voice. But you have a society with a more progressive, a more open-minded view on this matter, yes, you should totally try to have children to do something in this respect. That's not the case yet, and that's an aspect of child right advocacy where I would like to see more investment, more effort from all the actors. We need to give children a voice. We need to teach them their rights. We need to enable them to talk to politicians, to go to the parliament, to even sit in a parliament session and hear what the Congress people are discussing. Because as adults, we have this egocentric way of thinking that we think we know better than children. Not sure. I'll give you an example, and that's going to be I was in Niger, and I was working with children in conflict with the law. So a child in conflict with the law is a child who has been accused or convicted of committing an offense. And I was going through my questionnaire, and one question that I was asking was, what is the one thing that you want me to tell the policeman? One thing, if you were to say one thing, I was convinced that the children was going to tell me that we want them to not beat us, to not mistreat us. We don't want them to beat us up, because that's what happened when a child is accused of an infraction in Africa. Oftentimes he's going to be mistreated by the people, by the police. Corporal punishment is still the norm. So I was convinced that they say, no, we want them to listen to us. Because once we are arrested, they don't listen to us. They think we are criminal. They think even those who don't mistreat us don't listen to us. And I was shocked that a child tells me that what I want above everything is for law enforcement to listen to me and at least give me the benefits of the doubt, not just consider that I should be guilty. So yes, child activism, that's something that I would like to see happen more often. Thank you. I think we can all agree that it's very sad what's going on in Gaza, including with the latest attack. It was at the 2 days earlier, and then if even the Israeli government say it was an accident, it's everyone is agreeing that measures should be taken by both parties to minimize victims, civilian victims, especially children. UNICEF has been drawing attention on the fact that children are either dying or starving or in lack of basic necessities. We saw really things that we were really hoping that by this time on this planet, we wouldn't be seeing it again. And unfortunately, you can draw a lot of parallel with a lot of conflicts in different places in Africa where there are all these attacks and kidnapping, whether in Congo, and then widespread sexual violence in the civil war that's been going on for years in Congo, and in other places in Africa. So the situation is in Gaza is what I want to maybe focus on is that it's interesting that both international court have been requested to render decisions, both the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which is not a UN organ, and also the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, which is the UN court. And they both are really not ruling in favor of Israel. I would have liked to see, I guess we're going to see that in the coming days, especially with, again, the latest attack that I mentioned, how that plays out, how much does both parties really take into account what the world courts say. But there's not a lot of things to really to hope as the situation is going now. Let's just hope that, at least for the sake of children, people are going to come back to their senses and, yeah, take them more into account. Absolutely. Yeah, for the second aspect of your question, I totally agree, and I think we can all agree that women are also in need of protection about their fundamental human rights, and especially and more so in these countries where you still have a pretty much male-dominated society, where the women have the heaviest role in raising children. Okay, and even the affective connection, the personal affective connection is mostly with the mother than with the dad, because that's, in a lot of places, it's not just part of the culture for a dad to spend time with children and tell them I love you and really share quality time with them, right? So that's the role of the mother. But if the mother has, 5, 6, or something I didn't mention, very interesting, is that these countries are the countries in the world where you have the highest fertility rate. Okay, when you look at the rankings by the World Bank or by any international institution, you have at least 10 African countries at the top where you have the highest number of children per woman. So that really, it's in point to your question, to really highlight the importance of defending women's rights, because they are the one who spend most of the time with children. They are the one who is going to take care of them day after day. The man might go out trying to work and make some money, and that's very good. But a lot of women are going to be housewives. Society is changing, polygamy is losing ground. Women are being emancipated, but it's taking time. So women still have that role of rearing children. So it's critical. I agree with you. If we don't invest simultaneously on women's rights and really work to empower them and help them develop even ways of making money, then it's going to be very slow and very hard to really take children's rights up to the standards that we want. That's really, we cannot go around that. Coming to cultural relativism, so the diversity in Africa is really breathtaking, as in other places in the world. Even in one country, you have many tribes. So you have a lot of variety. Like, you go from one place in a country, you see the culture, the rules, who's the chief, how do you inherit the whole culture and the rules. You go to the village next to it, totally different. So that is a double-edged sword. It could be very good to use those rules and everything to adapt cultural relativism, to adapt the application of children's rights. But also, if you go too far in that direction, then how can you have a set of norms that apply to everyone, at least that protect everyone to the same level? Now, there is a lot of research are needed into these traditional rules and ways of protecting children. A few examples that I found were cases where the state allowed, with advocacy from UNICEF and from civil society, they allowed these alternative dispute resolution mechanism to handle cases of children in conflict with the law or of child victims, or either handle it, obviously, for cases of a lower gravity, right? Not the most serious cases, but that also is good. It reduced the number of cases that are going to end up in court. That's very good. Either handle the whole case or play a part in the handling of that case. For example, if you have a place where a child has been convicted, a child offender has been convicted of something and maybe we're supposed to go to prison, but if you have a community mechanism where he can be diverted instead of going to prison, so those are the ways in which, or even this alternative dispute resolution mechanism, where the whole case is handled outside formal justice system, but with the consent of the formal justice system. I think those are the ways in which culture could be used to further the protection of children's rights. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Those are really great questions, and I'll do my best to share some element of answers. So yeah, for non-African countries influencing children's rights, exploitation is really yeah, that's no secret for anyone. Again, like Gilberto say about corporate social responsibility, but when it comes to donation, so how they can positively influence, there is a lot of positive action. So I shouldn't forget, as an African, so I'm Canadian but originally from Cameroon, I didn't mention that, and I'm grateful for all the work and the help of the international community and the and all of our international partners. The question as to where is it really selfless, or that's another debate, but there's been a lot of help. There's been a lot of, schools built by these countries, hospital built by that country, computers donated to justice system so that they can, save and have good data on child justice and so on. There's a lot of things. What may be, and it's still going on, but what is lacking is often the capacity of the government to take over, because this help cannot last forever. Right? No country or no international organization is going to come in a country and say, okay, look, I'm going to be handling education of teenagers in this province they're just coming to implement a project time bound. When the time is over, who's going to take over? And this is where usually this transition to hand over this aspect or this project to the government, usually it's difficult, and you see a lot of projects in which once the international partners run out of funding, of time, and pull out, the thing collapses. The project collapses. The maintenance of whatever it was, it's going to stop, because the government did not come up to the capacity to take over. So is it that in this international donation and help, should capacity building of the country, for the country to be ready to take over, should capacity building be strengthened? Has it not been? I think there are cases where the capacity is strengthened, but again, priorities and all the issues and so on. So that's really where I think we should look at. I would like to focus on that. Like, how can we build the capacities of the country to take over whenever the international donation stops? There is something that comes to my mind that's very dear to my heart, and I really hope that one day I'll be able to work on it. Self-esteem. We have to build people's self-esteem. We have to develop young Africans' self-esteem. All of this, one of the elements to take into account in all of this regard, even with the context and the wars and instability and climate change and poverty and lack of education, people, what do they look up to? What do they want to be? What do they want to become? You may have threat from outside. You may have people want to marry you at a long age. You may have jihadist group trying to recruit you, but what do you have within you? What are your own ambitions? Are your own ambitions duplicated or drawn from the image that Facebook shows you and Instagram show you? Or is it something more realistic to your context and more in line with your own sense of being? I think I haven't seen that a lot, but doing any sort of solutions without working with the kids, working with the children to develop their self-esteem, to me, there is an essential component that is lacking. Because no matter what you do, people are still going to be preyed upon by all these bad guys, people who want to do FGM, because let's talk about FGM. Some people are not forced to do FGM. Some people are not forced to go into child marriage. Some girls are willing to do that because they've been brainwashed and they think that's the way to go about it. And so no matter the solutions that you bring from above, from outside, no matter the amount of money and training and capacity building, it's good to also work with the young people to develop critical thinking, independent thinking, decision-making, self-esteem, so that, and if you have that, working with them here to strengthen them, strengthen their, their soul, their psychology, decision-making, lucid vision, if the threat then, and then you're also working with the actors around them. Now, if the threats come from family wanting to marry them at a young age, from community leaders wanting them to do FGM, from jihad group wanting to recruit them, from bandits and criminals wanting to young people, they have been strengthened. They can make a decision. They can really look into what the proposition is and make their own decision. That's, to me, that's something I would like to see more investment on. The African Charter on the rights and welfare of the child, they don't go into a lot of details. They say that it's about respect. It's about respect the family and respect African unity, and it's and you can see behind it that old concept of Africa, because something very important in Africa is respect of the younger people for the people who are older than them. Even if you are 1 year older, I owe you respect. So that's really key. That's really precious in African mind, and that's a value I agree with. So that's, I think that's the idea behind that article in the charter. It doesn't go into details into like specific things that the child should do. I think it would have been hard for them to do that. So it stops there. But in African culture, in general, the duty of the child, that's what it is. To obey the parents, to respect people, to do their own in the house chores every day, and so on. It's basically to be respectful of the elders and of the institutions.